All right, here we go. If you're in here, this is Rediscovering God in America. Just a couple years ago, Newt Gingrich and his wife put this on to show you all the places in the U.S. Capitol where God is mentioned. And it's going to be super educational. You're going to love this. We're going to see many of these
God
who are on the
life,
56 trip, and I wanted to show you this, so go with it, Stephen. And all you online, enjoy this. It's great.
That these liberties
we'll see
are
half
the
of
gift
it
of
today
God.
and half of it on Memorial.
Thomas Jefferson.
Liberty is a gift of God, wrote Thomas Jefferson in 1781. The idea that rights and freedom come not from a king or a government, but a creator. At the birth of our nation, these were revolutionary thoughts. There is no attack on American culture more destructive and more historically dishonest than the relentless effort to drive God out of America's public square.
But unlike those who want to outlaw the words "under God," the Founding Fathers believed that God was central to defining America and to securing the blessings of liberty for our new nation.
The Founders understood that for a republic to work, it required a kind of civic virtue. And most of them recognized that civic virtue was connected in some way or another to private individual virtue. Most people then, and I would argue most people now, get their cues as to what constitutes virtue, get their code of ethics from some form of religion.
It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in it a finger of that almighty hand which has been so frequently and signally extended to our relief in the critical stages of the Revolution. James Madison.
Hello, I'm Newt Gingrich.
And I'm Callista Gingrich.
The next time someone says that religious expression has no place in the public square, take them on a stroll through Washington, D.C.
As you visit the monuments and memorials in our nation's capital, you will quickly find yourself on a profound and surprising walk of discovery. This walking tour is not just a look at the architecture and beauty of our nation's capital. It is a tour of our American history, of the great men and women, events, documents, and ideas that are at the heart of our freedom and our identity as Americans.
Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. George Washington.
You know, I think there's no question about it that Washington felt that morality, virtue, strong values were essential if people were going to rule themselves, that you had to have those things, and that he felt that organized religion fostered all of those things.
The founders certainly said often enough that without morals and religion, a government like ours, a republic, could not be made to work.
For the founders, it was clear. Religious liberty and freedom of expression would be a cornerstone of our democratic government and pluralistic society.
What the Founding Fathers really wanted to do was promote religious freedom, and they wanted to stop taxation, which they deemed unfair by Great Britain. Those are the two principal pillars of the creating of our country, and virtually all the Founding Fathers believed in those two goals to one degree or another.
Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. John Adams.
The genius of the founders was the realization that religious belief and expression, though woven into the fabric of the nation, was optional. Though most were religious men, some devoutly so, they chose to link liberty to a divine hand without advocating one religion or another, or making belief compulsory.
The framers weren't simply devoutly Christian believers who were
unapologetic boosters for the role of religion in the public square, and yet at the same time, the framers were not anti-clerical deists who saw no role for religion in the public square. The truth is the framers are a complex group of people that inhabit both of those ends of the spectrum, but more importantly, inhabit a much larger area in the middle in which these questions of the proper role for religion in the public square were vital and important, and which they themselves contested and struggled with.
Our purpose is neither theological nor an effort to advocate any religious worldview. Our purpose is a historical journey to rediscover the Founding Fathers' understanding of what is required to sustain liberty in a free society.
There were a variety of views about the role of government in regard to religion, but almost all believed in freedom of conscience and individual religious liberty. Government should not interfere with religion. At the same time, government was not hostile to religion.
And that's the great beauty of our founding documents, is they provide a balance of things like the role of religion and the role of individual rights, the roles of the states, the roles of the federal government. That balance is delicate, but it's beautiful.
Join us on our walking tour of America's capital city. Together, we'll rediscover that our nation was indeed founded under God. For 2 generations, we have passively accepted an assault on the core principle of American civilization that our rights come from God. This assault is led by an academic, legal, and media elite that finds religious expression frightening, threatening, old-fashioned, and unsophisticated.
And therefore, there's something like a culture war going on. That never happened before in American history. And so we're in a new situation. It's as if some are trying to take up George Washington's dare in his farewell address, when he says he would not take lightly the thought that a republic could survive without religion and morality. Some people want to make that test, can it? Let's suffocate, let's cut off the oxygen to the religious roots of America and the religious roots of American morality, and see if the republic survives.
But for most Americans, this effort to impose a ruthlessly secular society that forbids public reference to God and systematically removes all religious symbols from the public square is appalling.
I think people realize that the history and the principles and the ideals and values of our country have always recognized the importance of our Creator, and that to artificially try to remove those references today because of the limited views and the hostility of some people to religion, most people believe that's wrong.
Separation church and state today means secularize the public arena. Separation church and state 200 years ago meant keep the 2 institutions separate, but don't shut off the influences. We want the religious influence. We don't want a secularized society. We just don't want the church running the government or the government running the church.
Here in our nation's capital, there is ample evidence that our Founding Fathers, as well as our social and political leaders, have acknowledged the influence of our Creator in our nation's history.
Our first stop is the repository of our country's most important documents, the National Archives. Upon entering the National Archives, you will see an image of the 10 Commandments engraved in bronze on the floor. This image signifies that our legal system has its origins in the Judeo-Christian beliefs brought by the Pilgrims and others to the New World.
In the rotunda of the National Archives, inside a sealed bronze case, lies the most consequential document in the history of human freedom, the Declaration of Independence.
Well, the first thing to remember about the Founding Fathers is that they were revolutionaries. They overthrew the government, the whole system that they had inherited, and they set up something entirely new. So these were bold individuals.
When the Continental Congress decided it needed a declaration to explain why we were going to war, they appointed a committee that had Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin on it, among others. And you can see in the editing and writing of the Declaration how they were trying to balance things. For example, in that famous second paragraph, Jefferson's first draft begins, "We hold these truths to be sacred." And then you see Franklin's black printer's pen with backslashes, and he writes, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And his point was we were trying to create a new type of government that depended on rationality and reason and the consent of the governed, as well as dictates of religion. And then the sentence goes on, and it says, "They're endowed with certain inalienable rights." And you see John Adams's handwriting, writing in, "They're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights." So just in the editing of one half of one sentence of the Declaration, you see the great founders trying to balance the role of divine providence in our Lord in creating our nation with the role of rights, rationality, reason, and the consent of the governed. And they were able to bring us together with the writing of that document instead of using that document to pull us apart.
Drafted by Thomas Jefferson between June 11th and June 28th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence boldly describes, in exalted and unforgettable language, the relationship between individual rights and human liberty.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson.
You know, the Declaration begins when in the course of human events. Jefferson, I think, telegraphs here that he sees an order in history. That is, that history isn't just an assemblage of event after event after event, but rather there's a progress to it, there's a pattern to it, there's a development to it. That course of events, the guiding hand or the pattern in that course of events, he refers to it in many cases as the hand of the Creator or as providence. At the level of the cosmos, at the level of creation itself, clearly he sees the hand of what he calls providence or the Creator. Which we might call God.
You know, America at that time was often called the Second Israel. It was a people wandering not in a desert, as the ancient Hebrews had, but in a wilderness. That's why even on the seal of the United States, they had the idea of making an image of the people of Israel. And a motto proposed by Benjamin Franklin was that rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And it was that sense of liberation that Israel had to go through.
He said we need Moses holding up his rod in the wilderness with a pillar of fire, a pillar of cloud, and all of God's enemies being destroyed by the overwhelming sea. So Franklin is a deist, but not at all is he a believer in an impersonal providence.
And they ended up putting a pyramid on the seal of the United States.
That was, by the way,
Egypt
David
and
Barton,
the
that
desert
guy
around
I
it.
talk about if you
And,
didn't know who that
uncompleted
was.
because they thought any country given to liberty and justice for all was never going to quite get there. There was always going to be more to do.
Novus Ordo Seclorum means a new order for the ages. And that fits both with the religionists' understanding of America as the New Jerusalem, as well as with the deist understanding of America as a new age of reason.
Also on display in the rotunda is the Constitution of the United States.
The reason that in the Constitution it begins, "We the people," was to make it clear that it was not the states themselves, which are governmental entities, nor the government, the federal government, that established both the rights and the responsibilities and the structure of our government. The ultimate source of governmental authority is the consent of the governed, and that's how "we the people" was very important to the way in which the Constitution was written.
The First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
I think the First Amendment makes it clear that we shouldn't establish any particular religion, but it also allows us to practice religion even publicly if we want to. That balance, which we sometimes struggle with, is a good set of balances, understanding that there should be no establishment of any type of religion, and yet there can be a civic virtue and a respect for religion even in the public sphere.
The government is not a Christian government. The government is very much influenced by Christianity, has some Christian principles, biblical principles, undergirding it, but it does its working separately, and quite properly so. That's part of the Jewish and Christian understanding of how it ought to be.
Contrary to those who want to eliminate religious expression from the public square, these important words were written to protect freedom of religion, not freedom from religion.
The First Amendment, in its religion clause, was established to prohibit the federal government from establishing a national church. It was not a refutation or was not in any way hostile to religion in general, either in public or in private.
I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? Benjamin Franklin.
At 81, Benjamin Franklin was the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention. He and the other founding fathers made certain the language of the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and Bill of Rights made clear their intentions of forging a nation that acknowledged a divine creator.
At the Constitutional Convention, when things are breaking down, Benjamin Franklin makes a motion that they should have prayer at the convention. And he says if a sparrow falls, it cannot fall without his notice. Well, Franklin is trying to remind them that they're in the presence of an Almighty who's larger than themselves, and that should lead some humility. One of the interesting things is Franklin gets voted down. There's really a sense that you shouldn't be mixing religion too much with the making of laws.
Our walking tour next leads us to one of the most popular attractions in our capital city, the Washington Monument.
Go 5 more
From
minutes.
its base to its aluminum capstone, this memorial dedicated to our first president is filled with references to our creator. This is no coincidence, as Washington's writings contain numerous references to God.
I will tell about
reason and experience
where they
both
revised
forbid
this
us
in
to expect that national
2007, how
morality
they
can
took the
prevail in
words,
exclusion of
"Praise
religious
be to God,"
principle.
off of the capstone.
George Washington.
You know, the religion of Washington is a pretty controversial subject today, and it's something that scholars don't always agree on. I personally believe that Washington was a man of great faith. I think faith was very important to him. I think in his writings he uses the words providence and the helping hand of God over and over and over again.
No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. George Washington.
The words under God come first of all from George Washington himself. In his general orders to the Army, he said to his troops, "You must understand that now you are under God, the only defense of our liberties." If you don't have a munitions factory, Army, or Navy, you better have faith in divine providence. You don't have a lot to go on, and he did.
When Washington took the oath of office on April 30th, 1789, he asked that the Bible be opened to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28. Immediately following the oath, Washington added, "So help me God." He bent forward and kissed the Bible before him. Washington then delivered America's first inaugural address, in which he made note of America's indebtedness to our Creator.
In his inaugural address, he says that God touched us every step of the way to this victory. And so there's no one who more quickly and more strongly recognized that God was on our side, and without him, we simply would not have won.
When the Washington Monument was completed in 1884, it became the world's tallest structure at 555 feet. The day was commemorated by a ceremony placing a capstone at the top of the monument. The east side of the capstone is inscribed in Latin, Laus Deo, which means, praise be to God.
And I think he loved the fact that the top of it had the inscription, give praise to God, because that's what Washington did at every point in his life.